Peace be with you, brothers and sisters. In the words of the great theologian A. W. Tozer, the man who has God for his treasure has all things in one. Many ordinary treasures may be denied him, or if he is allowed to have them, the enjoyment of them will be so tempered that they will never be necessary to his happiness. There comes a day in the life of the believer, a day that often arrives not in triumph but in quiet surrender, when God becomes all you have. And on that day, you finally begin to breathe. You come to the startling realization that the very air you once thought sustained you, your career, your relationships, your self-confidence, was never designed to give you true life. You had been inhaling the approval of others, the fumes of professional success, the comfortable climate of your circumstances, but none of it ever truly reached the depths of your soul. Then, life shifts. That false oxygen runs out. And in that still, terrifying moment, grace rushes in like a tide. For the first time in your life, you take a real breath, and the breath is Him. It is in that precise moment that you begin to understand what faith truly is. It's not holding your breath, waiting for circumstances to improve. It's the very breath that keeps you alive. But why must God let the air run out first? Why does He so often wait until you have nothing, before He fills you with His everything? Today, let us explore together what truly happens when God becomes all you have, and why that moment will forever change the way you see life, faith, and peace. When God becomes the center of your life, my beloved brothers and sisters, everything comes into focus. This clarity doesn't arrive with perfect circumstances, it descends when your heart finally chooses its one, true center. The moment God assumes that central position, your scattered energies begin to converge. The decisions that once exhausted you no longer scream for your attention. The endless weighing of pros and cons that kept you paralyzed begins to quiet. This is because one truth now governs all other truths: does this bring me closer to Him, or does it pull me further away? When that question becomes the North Star of your life, confusion loses its throne. Think of how much of our lives are spent in a state of reaction. We react to the expectations of others, to the pressures of culture, to the regrets of our past and the fears of our future. Unconsciously, we allow 1,000 tiny voices to set the agenda for our day. But the soul was never created to orbit 100 suns, it was made to orbit the one and only sun. When God becomes the gravitational pull of your life, the secondary planets fall into their rightful place. Your work is still important, but it is no longer your identity. Your relationships are still precious, but they no longer determine your worth. Money is still useful, but it no longer writes your future. Everything returns to its proper role, because none of them is your God anymore. This clarity also transforms the way you interpret closed doors. Where every delay once felt like a personal failure, you can now ask a better question: what is God protecting, pruning, or preparing in me through this? His no is not a final judgment, but a loving redirection. A closed door can be a mercy in disguise, steering you away from something that would have stolen your focus on Him. When He is your center, you stop worshiping open doors and instead worship the One who, in His wisdom, opens and closes them. This newfound clarity changes your pace. You stop running the frantic race of comparison and begin walking at the speed of obedience. You're no longer chasing 5 conflicting goals, you are pursuing the one that governs all the rest, to please Him in all you think, say, and do. This focus doesn't make your life smaller, it makes it more potent. Like a river that no longer floods aimlessly in every direction, your strength converges into a current that can truly move things. Clarity redefines success. Success is no longer measured in trophies the eye can see, but in fruit that God can see. It is measured in peace where there was once panic, in integrity where image once reigned, in faithfulness over the flash of ambition. You begin to celebrate the hidden victories that once went unnoticed. You chose honesty when a lie would have been profitable. You chose forgiveness when resentment felt easier. You chose prayer when worry begged for control. These are not small things, they are the hallmarks of a life aligned with God. And this clarity liberates your voice. When you live for an audience of one, you don't have to explain yourself to everyone. You can be kind without performing, confident without being arrogant, and humble without disappearing. The desire to impress melts into a desire to bless. You no longer need the whole room to see you when you know your name is already known in heaven. If your world feels crowded and your mind feels noisy, the answer isn't more strategies. The answer is to choose a center strong enough to hold the weight of your life. Let God have that place, and then watch how the fog begins to lift. Not because every puzzle is solved, but because the picture of your life finally has a purpose again. When He is at the center, you finally see where everything belongs, including you. Brothers and sisters, when God becomes your source, your life begins to quiet down. That persistent, low-grade anxiety of wondering where your help will come from begins to dissolve. You stop looking at people as your providers or your job as your security. They are merely channels, the source is Him. This changes everything, because when the source can never run dry, you stop living in the fear of scarcity. We are trained from a young age to depend on visible systems. We count on our income, our education, our network, as if they are inexhaustible wells. But when life proves otherwise, when those wells run dry, panic sets in. That panic is not a punishment, it is a revelation. It reveals to us what we have truly been trusting in all along. And if the thing you trust in can be taken away, then it was never a true source to begin with. When you live from the source, you stop striving for results. You pray, you work, you plan, but you no longer panic. You recognize that blessing is not a transaction to be earned, but an expression of relationship. A branch doesn't strive for fruit, it simply abides in the vine, and the fruit appears in its season. Jesus made it crystal clear, apart from me, you can do nothing. He didn't mean we are incapable of activity. He meant that apart from abiding in Him, we can do nothing of lasting significance, nothing that carries eternal weight. This perspective brings a quiet dignity to ordinary days. You can handle success without arrogance and face loss without despair, because neither of them defines you. You can give freely because you no longer fear running out. You can rest while others hurry, because your source isn't dependent on deadlines or human approval. God is not limited by your job title, your savings account, or your strength. He was able to feed Elijah with ravens, lead Israel through the desert, and He is able to carry you through any scarcity that tries to intimidate your faith. When God is your source, gratitude replaces comparison. You begin to notice His provision in ways you once overlooked, a meal that arrives just when you need it, a word of encouragement at a critical moment, an irrational peace in the midst of uncertainty. You realize the miracle was never in the amount, but in the timing. God supplies just enough to teach us dependence, and just in time to prove His faithfulness. This kind of trust doesn't make you careless, it makes you confident. You stop trying to control what you were never meant to control. You stop begging for signs to prove you are safe, because you already know the one who is holding you. Even if every visible support were to vanish, your source remains. When that truth finally takes root, life is no longer a race for survival. It becomes an act of worship. To live this way is to walk in quiet strength. The storms may still come, but your anchor does not move. You know where your supply begins and where your faithfulness is owed, to the unchanging one. When God is your source, everything else becomes secondary. And yet, somehow, everything else begins to flow with a new peace and purpose. Brothers and sisters, when your heart finally chooses God as its ultimate goal, everything non-essential begins to fall away. The endless competition for attention, the chase for approval, the heavy burden of needing to prove yourself, all of it begins to lose its grip. You realize that so many of the things that once exhausted you were never God's will, they were just the noise of an ego that wanted to be seen. True strength begins the moment your ambition is converted into devotion. Most people live their lives pulled in a dozen different directions. They want to please God, but they also want to please everyone else. That divided focus creates exhaustion, not excellence. But when your goal narrows to one thing, to walk with Him, you gain an inner power that multitasking could never give. You begin to live with a purity of motive. Every decision is passed through the same filter: does this glorify God? Suddenly, confusion turns to clarity, because you have already chosen your one and only audience. The Apostle Paul captured this perfectly. One thing I do, forgetting what is behind and straining toward what is ahead, I press on toward the goal. This declaration wasn't about erasing the past, but about refusing to be distracted by it. Paul understood that a divided focus dilutes destiny. You cannot run forward while looking over your shoulder. You cannot chase God's will while measuring your progress against someone else's pace. When God becomes your singular pursuit, you finally find rest in a life of action. You are moving, but you are not flustered. You are working, but you are not striving. This shift empowers you to release the burdens you were never meant to carry. You don't have to control outcomes or fix everyone around you. You are simply called to walk in obedience and let God handle the results. This simplicity in faith does not mean laziness, it means alignment. You are no longer busy out of fear, you are active from a place of peace. You do less, but you accomplish more, because everything you now do flows from the right center. When God is your goal, success becomes deeper than performance. It's not about doing more, but about becoming more like Him. Patience becomes a victory. Integrity becomes a reward. Love becomes a strategy. Even suffering becomes productive, because it is shaping you into the likeness of Christ. This focus transforms ordinary moments into sacred ground. Doing the dishes, driving to work, listening to someone's pain, these are no longer trivial acts. They become part of your worship, because they are done with Him in mind. Simplicity also brings the joy back into the journey. You stop postponing your peace until your circumstances improve. You learn to enjoy the process, because God's presence is with you in it. The finish line no longer intimidates you, because the joy isn't at the end, but in every step taken with Him. The one who lives with God as their goal no longer fears failure, because every setback becomes a reminder that the goal isn't perfection, it's connection. Too many lives today are full of effort but lost in direction. People are accomplishing great things, yet they feel empty, because they have confused activity with meaning. But once you let God become your goal, meaning will find you. The noise recedes. The path narrows. But your heart expands. And in that holy simplicity, you discover that the more you seek only Him, the more power quietly flows through everything you do. Life gets lighter, not because it's easier, but because it is finally aligned with eternity. When you begin to see God not just as your Savior, but as your mentor, everything that once felt random begins to make sense. The difficult seasons you once ran from start to reveal their purpose. The waiting, the disappointments, the silence, all of it becomes part of a curriculum designed by a master who knows exactly what kind of heart he is shaping in you. In His classroom, nothing is wasted, not even the pain. Most believers pray for strength, but few are prepared for the training required to build it. God rarely teaches through comfort, He teaches through contrast. He allows you to face your weakness so you can learn His dependence. He walks you through confusion so you can recognize His peace. He permits rejection so He can show you that His acceptance is enough. This isn't cruelty, it is craftsmanship. Every challenge becomes a tool in the hands of a genius who refuses to let you remain shallow. Think of Joseph, sold by his brothers, forgotten in a prison, misunderstood at every turn. To anyone else, his story looked like a tragedy. But in God's economy, it was preparation. Every betrayal trained him to lead with mercy. Every disappointment cultivated the endurance he would need to carry influence without arrogance. When the promotion finally came, Joseph didn't have to learn humility, it was already built into his spirit. The pain that once seemed meaningless became wisdom in disguise. When God is your mentor, you stop seeing suffering as punishment and start seeing it as pruning. You realize that pruning doesn't destroy a branch, it directs it. It removes what would have kept you from bearing fruit. You learn to stop asking, "Why me?" and start asking, "Lord, what are you forming in me through this?" That single question transforms suffering into growth. It turns a delay into a season of preparation, not a sign of being overlooked. And when the lessons get hard, grace becomes the textbook. The Holy Spirit is the gentle tutor who sits beside you, not to grade you on your failures, but to guide you toward maturity. He corrects not to shame you, but to align you. The very moments you thought were God's silence were often Him whispering, "Keep going. I am still here." His discipline is not a rejection, but a proof of relationship. Only a mentor who is invested in your future takes the time to train your character. You begin to understand that wisdom isn't gained by avoiding storms, but by learning how to stand in them. Every test of faith becomes an opportunity to experience His power firsthand. Every unanswered prayer becomes a lesson in trust. And when you finally graduate from one season to the next, you realize the true lesson was never about the circumstances, it was about what your heart learned in them. You learn to recognize His voice. When God becomes your mentor, life stops feeling like chaos and starts looking like a well-orchestrated dance, where even the missteps serve a rhythm. The same pain that threatened to break you now becomes the very thing that makes you. And one day, you will look back and see that every trial had a purpose, to make you wise, to make you gentle, to make you strong, and most of all, to make you more like Him. There is a quiet that only God can fill. It shows up when the people you leaned on have moved on, when the noise of life fades, and when no distraction seems to work anymore. At first, it feels like abandonment. But if you stay in that silence long enough, something holy begins to unfold. You start to perceive a presence you were once too busy to notice, the quiet companionship of God Himself. Loneliness is one of His most misunderstood gifts. It is not a punishment, it is a preparation. God uses solitude to separate you from your false dependencies. He removes the props so you can learn that His presence is enough. In the wilderness, He teaches you to stop seeking validation from the outside and to start receiving affirmation from heaven. The very emptiness you once feared becomes the space where His voice grows clear. When everyone else steps back, He steps closer. This is what Moses experienced. For 40 years, he was hidden in the desert, away from the applause, away from the crowds. It was in that obscurity that God spoke to him from a burning bush. It was in the silence that Moses learned to recognize the divine voice. The lesson was simple: before God trusts a man to lead in public, He first trains him to walk with Him in private. Solitude purges the heart until you no longer need to be seen to know you are known. When God is your companion, your conversation with Him becomes more real than the conversations around you. You find yourself talking to Him about the things you once carried alone. Prayer, which once felt like a ritual, becomes a relationship. You stop performing for heaven and start confiding in it. You no longer rush through your quiet moments, you crave them, because somewhere in that stillness, you meet the one who never leaves. This companionship doesn't erase the ache of missing human connection, but it transforms it. You begin to love people from a place of fullness, not need. You can offer encouragement without expecting it in return. You can forgive without demanding closure. You can serve without fear of being overlooked. When your soul is filled with His presence, you no longer demand that other people fill a space that only He can occupy. That is the freedom of divine friendship. There is a peace that lives only in God's presence, a peace that is not dependent on noise, or approval, or company. You discover that even in an empty room, you are never truly alone. The same God who walked with Adam in the cool of the garden walks with you through the chaos of this world. The same God who sat with Elijah under the broom tree sits with you when you feel unseen. His silence is not absence, it is an invitation to perceive. When God is your companion, loneliness becomes a classroom of love. You begin to see His fingerprints in every moment, a scripture that comforts you at just the right time, a memory that brings strength, a quiet assurance that you are right where you are supposed to be. What once felt like isolation is transformed into intimacy. And when His companionship becomes enough, you realize you were never waiting for people to understand you. You were waiting to recognize Him in the silence. When your heart begins to love God more than anything else, every other love finds its proper place. You stop clinging to people in fear and start loving them in freedom. You no longer measure your worth by who stays or who leaves, because your heart is anchored in the one who never changes. It is here that the soul is finally healed from the exhaustion of conditional love. God's love becomes the steady rhythm that carries you through every season. Human love, even at its best, can be fragile. It expects, it fears, and it can wound unintentionally. But divine love teaches you how to love without losing yourself. It teaches you to give without demanding, to forgive without waiting for an apology, and to remain kind even when you are misunderstood. When you have tasted the love of God, you understand that love was never meant to be a contract of comfort, but a covenant of character. It's not about what you get, it's about who you become. This love changes how you see others. You begin to recognize the image of God even in the people who have hurt you. You start praying for the people you once resented. You stop labeling them by their worst moments, because you remember how patiently God has dealt with your own faults. That is what divine love does. It softens the hard places in your heart until mercy becomes your instinct, not your struggle. You will find that the closer you walk with God, the harder it is to hate anyone. To love God first is not to neglect human love, it is to perfect it. It removes the desperation and replaces it with devotion. You no longer love people to fill your emptiness, you love them to reflect His fullness. When you stop demanding that another person be your everything, you become less demanding, more patient, and more peaceful. Relationships become lighter, healthier, and more joyful. The pressure is off, because the throne of your heart is already occupied. The love of God also protects you from the false loves that look bright but burn cold. You begin to discern what is real from what is temporary. You recognize that lust can mimic affection, that control can masquerade as approval, and that flattery can simulate care. But God's love exposes the counterfeit, not to shame you, but to save you. He reminds you that true love leads to peace, not panic. It builds, it does not consume. It elevates, it does not control. And once you know that kind of love, you stop settling for less. This is the love that makes obedience possible. You no longer follow God out of fear of punishment or desire for reward. You follow Him because you love Him, and that love changes everything. It makes sacrifice sweet, forgiveness natural, and endurance possible. The duties you once called burdens become expressions of love. You serve not because you have to, but because you want to. That is what it means to have Him as your beloved. And when that love governs your heart, life is no longer a cycle of disappointments. You are not waiting for the perfect person or the perfect day to feel complete. You carry your completeness within you. Every sunrise becomes a reminder that before you ever performed, before you ever succeeded, before you ever even called His name, you were already loved. When God becomes your beloved, you finally understand that love was never something you had to find. It was the one who found you first. When we try to piece our lives together on our own, it feels fragmented. The broken dreams, the relationships that didn't last, the seemingly unanswered prayers, they all look like random shards, until God steps into the picture. When He becomes the center, the pieces begin to make sense. What once looked like a mess starts to reveal a masterpiece in progress. You begin to realize that nothing was wasted, it was all part of His design. When God is not at the center, even our blessings can become burdens. We clutch them too tightly, afraid to lose them, and end up worshiping the gifts that were meant to serve us. But when He takes His rightful place, the burden shifts. You stop living to keep everything from breaking and you let Him orchestrate what needs to stay and what needs to be removed. Suddenly, peace enters, not because everything is fixed, but because you have finally stopped fighting the one who knows where every piece belongs. Romans 8 verse 28 says, "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him." This doesn't mean that all things are good. Some things hurt. Some seasons are heartbreaking. But when God is at the center, even the painful pieces are woven into a tapestry of redemption. He can take a betrayal and turn it into wisdom. He can take a loss and turn it into compassion. He can take a delay and turn it into preparation. The same hand that allowed the storm is the same hand that anchors your soul in it. When you live from this center, you no longer need to understand every detail. Faith replaces the obsession with answers. You stop asking, why, and you start trusting, who. You begin to see that God never promised explanations, He only promised His presence. And in His presence, the questions lose their power. You learn that understanding everything doesn't bring peace, trusting Him in everything does. Every broken piece of your story becomes an altar on which His glory rests. The pain that once made you bitter now makes you merciful. The moments that once made you doubt now make you humble. You stop hiding your scars, because they tell the story of a faithful God. Every scar becomes a testimony to His ability to rebuild what the world calls irreparable. The very fragments that once embarrassed you become evidence of His craftsmanship. When God is at the center, balance replaces chaos. You begin to make decisions that are aligned with eternity, not with temporary feelings. You choose peace over pride, forgiveness over revenge, and patience over panic. And then, bit by bit, the picture of your life begins to look like Christ, not because you planned it that way, but because you let Him guide every stroke. So when everything seems out of place, don't rush to fix it. Invite God back to the center. The same light that brought order to creation will bring order to your heart. He will take what seems random and reveal the pattern that was always hidden. Every piece has a purpose. Every delay has a direction. And every wound has a redemption waiting to unfold. When God is the center of all things, nothing in your life is meaningless anymore. In the end, all that we have chased, all that we have lost, and all that we have learned leads us to a single discovery: God was the point of it all along. The things we thought would complete us were never the foundation, they were signposts intended to lead us back to the source. When you finally arrive at that place where nothing else can satisfy, you begin to see with new eyes. You understand that peace is never found in answers, but in presence. It is not found in control, but in surrender. When God becomes your everything, you stop living for the outcome and you start living from the overflow. You no longer panic when things change, because your foundation does not. You stop measuring your worth by what you achieve, because His love is already secure. You are no longer chasing the temporary to fill the eternal. You learn a contentment that comes not from having everything you want, but from realizing you already have everything that matters. This is what it means to see life not through the lens of fear, but through the lens of faith, not through scarcity, but through grace. You understand that every joy and every trial was a tool to change your life. You see that God's goal was never just to make your life comfortable, but to make your heart capable of loving Him completely. He didn't remove the storm, He became your shelter in it. He didn't erase the pain, He gave it a purpose. So when you reach that moment where all you have left is God, do not call it loss. Call it discovery. You have found what every heart is looking for, even if it doesn't know it yet. The world calls it surrender, but heaven calls it freedom. For when you finally let go of everything else, you are left not with nothing, but with the One who is everything. From that moment on, life begins to make sense, not because you understand every mystery, but because you walk with the One who does. When God becomes your everything, you no longer need a map, you have found the guide. You no longer chase the light, you walk with the light. You no longer search for meaning, you are living in it. It is then that the heart finds its rest, the soul takes its breath, and all that you ever questioned becomes clear in His hands.